I caught her on my front steps before her knees gave out completely. Her coat was wrong. She was wearing the gray one with the broken zipper she'd had since college, the one she always meant to throw away but never did. I noticed the coat before I noticed anything else. It's strange, the details your brain locks onto when it's trying to protect you from the bigger thing. Then I saw her face. "Hey," I said. Just that. Because what else do you say when your younger sister shows up at your door at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night with a split lip and eyes that look like she hasn't slept in 3 weeks? I got her inside. I made her sit on the couch. I put the kettle on because I needed something to do with my hands and because our mom always made tea when things fell apart, and I am more like my mom than I've ever admitted. She didn't say anything for a long time. Neither did I. The kettle went off. I poured 2 mugs and set hers in front of her and sat across from her in the armchair and waited. "I didn't know where else to go," she finally said. "You don't have to explain that. Carol's away visiting her parents." Mom would panic. She wrapped both hands around the mug even though it was warm in my apartment. "You were the only one I could think of." "Okay," I said. "That's fine. You're here." She nodded. She was looking at the steam rising off the tea, not at me. I'd seen my sister cry at movies, at graduations, at sentimental commercials around the holidays. I'd never seen her look like this. This was something different. This was the face of someone who had been crying so often and for so long that they'd moved past it into something quieter and more frightening, like she'd worn the emotion down to the bone. "How long?" I asked. She knew what I meant. "A while," she said. "How long is a while, Iris?" She looked up at me then. "Since about 8 months in. We'd been at her wedding 2.5 years ago. I'd worn a green dress. I'd danced with our dad. I'd thought her husband was fine. A little quiet, a little stiff, but fine. Steady was the word I'd used when our mom asked me what I thought of him. He seemed steady." I sat with that for a moment. "Does he know you're here?" I told him I was going to my coworker's place, that we had an early project deadline. She paused. "He checks my phone sometimes. I deleted your number from my contacts and memorized it instead." Something moved through my chest when she said that. Something cold. "He checks your phone." Among other things. I asked her to tell me. She didn't want to at first. She kept saying it wasn't as bad as it looked, which is something I have since learned is almost always what people say when it is exactly as bad as it looks, or worse. But I waited, and eventually she talked. It had started small, the way these things apparently always do. Comments about what she wore, who she spent time with. He didn't like her college friends. Too loud, too opinionated. They were a bad influence. He didn't like her staying late at work. He thought her sister, me, was overbearing. That part landed like a stone in still water. "You stopped calling me as much," I said slowly. "He didn't like it when we talked for too long." I thought about all the times over the past 2 years I'd called and she'd picked up distracted, a little rushed, said she had to go. I'd thought she was just busy. I thought married life was just like that sometimes. I'd believed that because it was easier than believing the alternative. "The money," she continued. "He manages all of it. My paycheck goes into a joint account and he controls the card. I have to ask for cash if I need anything." "Iris, I know. Does anyone at work know?" "I wear a lot of foundation." She said it like it was nothing. Like she'd made peace with that sentence a long time ago. I put my mug down because my hands had started to shake and I didn't want her to see. I'm the older one. Only by 2 years, but still. I'd always been the one she called when things went wrong. When she got a bad grade in high school. When her first boyfriend cheated on her. When she didn't get into the graduate program she'd wanted. I had always answered. I had always shown up. I hadn't shown up for this. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. And I tried hard to keep my voice steady because I was asking for my own sake as much as hers, and that wasn't fair to her. "Because I kept thinking it would stop," she said. I kept thinking I must be doing something wrong, and if I could figure out what it was, he'd go back to being the way he was at the beginning. She looked down at the mug again. And because I was ashamed, and because he told me no one would believe me, that they'd think I was dramatic, that you especially would think I was dramatic. He'd said my name. He'd specifically said my name. I breathed through my nose for a moment. "You're going to stay here tonight," I said. "I can't, if I'm not home in the morning. I'll figure that out. Tonight you're staying here." She stayed. I gave her my bed and slept on the couch, or tried to. I lay there in the dark looking at the ceiling and doing the thing where you replay every memory and look for what you missed. Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Had she flinched when he raised his voice about the football game? Last Christmas. Why had she been so quiet? The birthday lunch in March. She'd worn long sleeves even though it was warm. I'm a physical therapist. I work with people's bodies every day. I know how to read the way a person holds themselves, the way they protect a part of themselves they don't want touched. I should have seen it. I didn't see it. In the morning, I made eggs and we sat at my kitchen table and I let her lead the conversation wherever she wanted to take it. She talked about work for a while. She talked about a book she'd been reading. Normal things, surface things. I followed her there. I didn't push. Then, over the second cup of coffee, she said quietly, "I don't know how to leave." "You don't have to know yet. You just have to be here right now. He'll know something is wrong. He always knows." "What happens when he knows something is wrong?" She didn't answer. She turned her mug in slow circles on the table. "Okay," I said. "Then let's make sure he doesn't know." She looked at me. "You said he's never met most of your coworkers in person," I said. "He doesn't like them, so you don't see them socially. He's never been to your office. He controls what you wear, what you spend, who you talk to. But you and I look alike, Iris. We've always looked alike." She went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to go back with you." "Absolutely not. Not as me. As you." The silence that followed was the longest kind. She stared at me, and I watched her face move through about 14 different emotions, and then she said, "That is the most insane thing you've ever said to me." Probably. He would know. He would figure it out immediately. Maybe, but maybe not right away. And I just need enough time. Enough time for what? I'd been a physical therapist for 4 years. Before that, I'd spent 3 years working as a first responder in the county where I grew up, which is a thing I did because I was 22 and felt invincible, and I ended up loving it more than I expected. I was not a Navy SEAL. I was not a soldier. But I was someone who had talked down people in crisis, who had worked alongside police and EMTs, who had taken enough self-defense training to feel genuinely confident, and who, more than any of that, was furious in the controlled, focused way that comes when you have been lying awake all night rearranging your memories and understanding, one by one, what you missed. "Enough time to understand what we're dealing with," I said, "so we can get you out safely. And so he understands that this is over." She argued with me for 2 hours. I let her argue. I answered every objection calmly, and when I didn't have a good answer, I said so. And when she ran out of objections, she sat with her hands flat on the table looking at me like she was seeing something she didn't recognize. "You'd do that," she said. Not a question exactly. "You're my sister." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked exhausted and terrified and something else, something that might, distantly, have been relief. "If anything happens to you, I'll be fine. If anything happens to you, I will never forgive myself. Then help me make sure nothing happens. We planned it carefully." She talked me through the apartment, the layout, his routine, the things that would seem off if I got them wrong. The mug he used in the morning. The fact that he didn't like the overhead light in the kitchen, only the under-cabinet one. The way he came home on Tuesdays and Thursdays expecting dinner already started. The name of her coworker she was supposed to have stayed with, Carol, who was conveniently still out of town. I wrote things down and memorized them and then burned the paper in my kitchen sink, which felt both dramatic and completely necessary. She lent me clothes. She talked me through her makeup routine, the specific way she wore her hair. She's 2 years younger than me, but we've always been nearly identical. Same height, same build, same oval face. Our mother has in every photo from before we were born. Growing up, strangers mixed us up constantly. We'd exploited it shamelessly as kids. We weren't kids anymore. There's a folder on the laptop, she told me. In the documents under a fake name, I've been saving things. Screenshots, photographs. She paused. I didn't know why I was saving them. I think some part of me always knew. That's smart. That's really smart, Iris. Don't let him near the laptop. I won't. She stayed at my apartment with instructions to stay offline, to not contact him, to rest. I drove to her neighborhood in her car. Parked where she told me. Walked to her building the way she walked to her building. I had her keys. I had her coat, the gray one with the broken zipper. I let myself in. The apartment was neat in the way that suggests effort rather than ease. Everything in its place, surfaces clean, furniture that matched. It looked like a catalog photo. It felt like a held breath. I found the folder on the laptop and I sent copies of everything to myself and to an email address she didn't know I'd created for exactly this purpose. Then I made myself a cup of tea in the mug she told me he didn't use, and I sat at the kitchen table and I waited. He came home at 6017. I heard the key in the lock and something happened in my body that I want to be honest about. I was afraid. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. My heart rate went up. My hands were very still, which is what my hands do when I'm scared. They go still rather than tremble, and I had to consciously start moving them. The door opened. He was taller than I'd remembered from the wedding, good-looking in a way that's easy to describe as charm and easy to mistake for warmth. He came in, set his bag down, and looked at me sitting at the table. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. He went to the refrigerator. He stood there looking into it for a moment. What happened to dinner? I wasn't feeling well today. He closed the refrigerator. He turned and looked at me again, and something shifted in his expression. Something that hadn't been visible at the wedding, something I wouldn't have known to look for then. "You look different," he said. I changed my hair a little. She had told me to say this. He came and stood at the edge of the kitchen. Not close, but positioned in the way people position themselves when they want to fill a space. "Did Carol drive you home?" "I took a rideshare." She had told me to say this too. He stood there for another moment. I kept my face neutral and my hands around my mug, and I looked back at him with my sister's eyes. Then he went to change out of his work clothes. I made dinner. I did it the way she told me to, the specific dishes, the timing. I set the table the way she set the table, and across that table I sat with him for an hour and a half, and I watched him. I watched the way he corrected the things I said, small corrections delivered in a tone that sounded like concern but functioned like instruction. I watched the way he asked questions that were framed as interest but structured as accounting, where I had been, what I had done, in what order. I watched the way his shoulders changed when I didn't answer fast enough or the way he wanted, and I thought about my sister sitting across from this every night. By the time I cleared the table, I was no longer afraid. I was something else entirely. He found the occasion after dinner, when I was washing dishes. He came to stand behind me and I felt him there before I heard him move, which is its own kind of information. He said something low and critical about the way I'd spoken to him at dinner. I'd apparently been off in some way he didn't specify, and then he put his hand on my shoulder, the grip of it meant to be the period at the end of the sentence. I turned around, and I looked at him with a steadiness I had spent my adult life building, the kind that comes from sitting in the back of an ambulance with someone in crisis, from being the calmest person in the room because someone has to be, and I said, "Take your hand off me." He did, because people like that are not, at their core, brave. They are strategic. They need an opponent they've already broken down. He looked at me and something crossed his face that I think was the first real flicker of uncertainty. "What did you just say to me?" "I think you heard me. You need to watch your—" "I have copies of everything," I said. "The photos, the bank records showing her accounts, the messages, everything in that folder. I sent them all to myself and to 3 other people tonight." The color in his face changed. "I'm not your wife," I said, "but she's my sister, and she is leaving you." "That part has already been decided. It happened before I walked through that door tonight. What hasn't been decided yet is how complicated you want to make the rest of this." He stood very still. "You are going to allow her to remove her personal belongings from this apartment without interference. You are going to speak to the attorney her family has already contacted." A small lie. We hadn't contacted one yet. But he didn't know that. "And you are never, for the rest of your life, going to put your hands on a woman again. Because I will be paying attention. And I have a very long memory." I don't know what he expected when he came home that evening. I don't think it was this. He said nothing. He took a step back. And I understood in that moment what my sister had been living inside, because I saw it on his face. The recalculation, the way someone like that processes the sudden loss of an advantage they believed was permanent. He had built something over 2.5 years, carefully, deliberately, in small enough increments that she hadn't seen the whole shape of it until she was standing inside it. He had not built it to withstand someone who wasn't afraid of him. I slept in the guest room that night with the door locked and my phone in my hand, and I will admit that I slept lightly. In the morning, he left early without saying anything to me, and I waited an hour after he left, and then I started making the calls. Our mom first. That conversation was the hardest of all of them. Mom went quiet in a way I wasn't expecting, and then she said, "I thought something was wrong. At Christmas, I thought something was wrong and I talked myself out of it." "We all did," I said. "That doesn't make me feel better." "No, me neither." I called a colleague who'd once referred a patient to a family law attorney she trusted. I called that attorney, who called me back within the hour. I called Iris and told her to come over to my apartment, that it was time, that it was okay. She cried when I told her what had happened, the real kind. The kind she hadn't been able to do in however long. She sat on my couch in the same gray coat and she cried, and I sat next to her and let her. "I was so scared he'd figure out it wasn't me," she said. "He almost did. He said I looked different." She laughed a little, watery and surprised. "What did you say? That you'd changed your hair?" She laughed again, and then she was crying again, and that was fine. That was allowed. Removing her things from the apartment took 3 trips and 1 uncomfortable hour while he stood in the living room and watched with his arms crossed and said nothing. He had, I believe, spoken to his own attorney by then. He understood the shape of his situation. I stood next to my sister for every minute of every trip and I did not look away from him once. The last thing she took was the laptop. The divorce took the better part of a year. It was not clean or easy. These things rarely are, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. There were months that were very hard. There were weeks when Iris called me late at night, and I could tell she was close to the edge of something, and I stayed on the phone with her as long as she needed, which is the only thing I knew how to offer, and which turned out to be enough. She found a therapist through a domestic violence resource center in our city. She went every week. She came home slowly, to herself. Not the self she'd been before him, because that's not how it works, but to something new that she was building on purpose, with intention, which I think might actually be stronger. She got her own bank account, her own credit card. She relearned, in her late 20s, the texture of making her own choices without looking over her shoulder. She called me when she wanted to, for as long as she wanted to. She bought a coat to replace the gray one. She threw the gray one away. I went back to my regular life. I went back to work, to my apartment, to my routines. But something had shifted in me too, in some permanent way that I don't fully have language for yet. I think about the folder on her laptop. All those screenshots and photos she'd saved, All that quiet, methodical preservation of evidence at a time when she'd been so diminished she'd barely trusted her own perception of reality. Some part of her had been fighting back even when she couldn't feel it. I think about that a lot. She wrote me a letter about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. A real one, on paper, in her handwriting, which is rounder than mine and always has been. I'm not going to share everything she said. Some things belong to the two of us in the space between us, and that's how they should stay. But she said this, toward the end of it, "You came to my door in my coat, and you scared me half to death, and I don't think I've ever felt so loved in my entire life." I folded that letter and put it in the drawer of my nightstand, where I keep the things I want to be able to reach in the dark. She's doing well. Better than well. She's learning to trust her own gut again, which is the deepest kind of recovery, the kind you can't rush and can't fake. She calls when she wants to. She talks as long as she wants to. Sometimes she doesn't call for a few days, and that's fine too, because silence between us now means quiet, and quiet means safe. And safe means everything. If you are in something that feels like what my sister was in, if you are memorizing phone numbers instead of saving them, if you are wearing long sleeves in warm weather, if you are being told that no one would believe you, I want you to hear this directly. Someone will believe you. I am someone who will believe you. Call the number. Keep the folder, memorize the address, do the quiet, unglamorous, terrifying work of getting ready to leave, even if you're not ready yet, even if it takes longer than you think it should. You are not dramatic. You are not the problem, and you are not as alone as he has worked very hard to make you feel. My sister is proof of that. And so, I've come to believe, am I? I've thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the plan. The plan was improvised and half reckless, and I wouldn't recommend it as a strategy to anyone. I mean the thing underneath the plan. What had to already exist inside a person before they could walk through a stranger's door wearing their sister's coat and look a dangerous man in the eye without flinching. I think it was just the accumulation of choices. Small ones, mostly. The choice to stay on the phone a little longer. The choice to show up when it was inconvenient. The choice to keep paying attention even when everything looked fine on the surface. None of those things felt significant when I was doing them. They were just the ordinary texture of being someone's older sister. But they added up to something. They added up to a version of me that was capable of being there when it actually mattered. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. You don't decide one day to be the kind of person who comes through. You just keep making the small choices over and over, and then one night your sister shows up with a split lip and you find out who you've been becoming all along. What her husband built over 2.5 years, he built through the steady erosion of her trust in herself. That's how it works. It's not dramatic at the start. It's a comment here, a restriction there, a slow redrawing of the lines of what's normal until she couldn't remember where the original lines had been. He was counting on the fact that isolation is invisible from the inside. And he was right, for a long time. He was very nearly right. What he didn't account for was the folder on the laptop. My sister, even at her most diminished, even when she'd been told so many times that she was the problem that she'd started to half believe it, some part of her kept saving things. Screenshots. Photographs, a quiet, stubborn record of what was actually happening. She didn't know why she was doing it. She told me she didn't know why. But I know why. Because the part of a person that knows the truth doesn't fully go away, no matter how hard someone works to bury it. It goes quiet. It goes underground, but it keeps moving. That's what I want to say about resilience, because I think we misunderstand it. We think it looks like not breaking. It doesn't always. Sometimes it looks like breaking completely and still, in some small corner of yourself, keeping a record, still knowing, even when you can't say it out loud, that what is happening to you is wrong. Iris kept that folder for months before she ever came to my door. That was her resilience. That quiet, private refusal to let the truth disappear entirely. And the cause and effect of all of it is simple, if you follow the line. He chose to diminish someone. She chose, slowly and painfully, to find her way back to herself. I chose to show up. Every outcome in this story traces back to a choice someone made, not fate, not luck, just the accumulation of what people decide to do when no one is watching and the stakes feel impossibly high. Iris is doing well. I say that without qualification. She is doing well. And I think about her sometimes, when I'm at work, when I'm sitting across from a patient who is guarding a part of themselves they don't want me to touch. And I think about how long a person can carry something alone before it starts to cost them everything. I think about how much it matters. Not in a grand way, but in the most ordinary and essential way. To be the person who notices, to be the person who stays on the phone, to be the person who still shows up at the door, even when everything on the surface looks fine. That is the only lesson I have. It's not complicated, it's just hard to sustain. Keep showing up.